Hi everyone, Corey here with Team Cramer Fishing, and this video is going to be about the best multi-species / all-purpose fishing rod. And specifically, it's going to be about a 6-foot light power Ugly Stik GX2. Let me explain why I think this is the best all-purpose fishing rod. Okay, before we get into this, I want to kind of just show everybody where this rod falls in compared to other Ugly Stik GX2s. The first rod that I want to show you, this is what you typically find, or something very similar to this is what you typically find when you go, to Walmart or Bass Pro or wherever, and you're looking at the Ugly Stiks. This is a 7-foot medium power Ugly Stik GX2, and the 6'6" or 7-foot are typically what you see people like destroying or using on YouTube. I know Luke from Catfish and Carp tried to destroy a rod almost exactly the same as this one. If you go to Steve at Key West Kayak Fishing's YouTube page, he catches big sharks and like amberjacks and stuff, whatever you can find. Just for fun, he goes out and takes one of these big Ugly Stiks and tries to do that. But the Ugly Stik that I'm talking about, the GX2 that I'm talking about, is quite a bit smaller and lighter. For most of the fishing that we do, this is really overkill. I mean, if you can reel in, like a 200-pound shark or whatever, I mean, we're not going to be encountering that in 99.9% of our fishing outings. So to lug around a big 7-foot, this thing is pretty heavy, I mean, compared to most fishing rods nowadays. And to chuck it in and out of the car or carry it or try to cast it out under trees and things like that, it's really unnecessary. So I went down to a 6-foot light powered Ugly Stik GX2, and this is very light. It's just slightly heavier than some of the more high-end fishing rods out there, but it's still very, very light. And one of the things I realized from watching some of these like destruction videos when it came to Ugly Stiks is just how strong that these GX2s were. And I thought, hey, if the medium powered ones are that strong, surely the light powered ones are going to be pretty strong too. But I don't have to lug around all that extra weight. So the idea was, for its size, it can reel in just about anything. So that's why I initially tested it out, and I like the 6-foot size a lot better. I mean, it packs a lot easier. This is a 2-piece, so you can break it down into 2 3-foot sections. You can fit it really anywhere. I mean, if you ride your bike to fish, you can put it on there. If you have to pack a bunch of stuff in the car, it comes in really handy to be able to break it down. So this is bigger though than the ultralight, which sort of goes without saying. I just did a review on my daughter Vivian's ultralight GX2, and it's worked really well too. But if you do get a big fish, I mean, you can't really manhandle it when you're dealing with something that just doesn't have very much backbone at all, and it doesn't cast very far either because it's pretty short. So the light powered version is right in the middle there, and that is the one that I consider the best multi-species all-purpose fishing rod. Now let me get into some of the details about why I picked this one in particular. Okay, for any body of water, the number of fish that are under 1 pound are going to be way, 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 way higher than the number of fish that are bigger than 1 pound. So this isn't going to be exactly right for every body of water, but the shape of it is going to be correct. So there are going to be millions of fish that are under 1 pound. And as you go up in size, there are going to be less and less and less and less fish. So, there may only be a few hundred that are over 5 pounds. And then as you get over to, like the 20-pound range, the 35-pound range, the percentage of fish in that lake that are going to be that size are going to be under 1%. And or river or ocean or lagoon or wherever you're fishing, there's always going to be a lot more smaller fish than there are bigger fish. Now, if you're going out and you're only targeting the biggest of the biggest fish, that's fine, but you're going to have very specialized gear for that. And this rod is not about specialization; it's about being multi-purpose and multi-species. So, not only does this chart reflect, the number of fish in total, but it also is how each species is like too. So of any given species, there's always going to be a lot more that are smaller than there are that are bigger, even if you're talking about a really big fish. So what that means is that you want a rod that matches this percentage. You want a rod that can throw lures and reel in fish that are in this 1 to 5 pound range with really a high frequency. So you want to be able to throw these smaller baits. You want to be able to work it in the conditions. If you're in like a creek, if you're along a riverbank, if you're in the areas where those smaller fish are at, or if you're on a kayak, you want your rod to be able to throw those lures that can catch most of those smaller fish. But you also want to have a good percentage chance, a reasonable percentage chance of catching those big fish, but you want them to match. If you take a giant, surf casting rod out to like a little pond, the chart on that surf casting rod is going to be exactly the opposite of this. It's the odds of it catching a big fish are going to increase, and the odds of it catching a smaller fish are going to decrease. So that's not what you want. In my opinion, this rod exactly matches this. You may still be able to, you're going to be able to pull in a 35 pound flathead with this rod. No problem. It'll be fun. But the odds of you being able to do that match what the rod can do. It can bring in these smaller fish really easily, and they will be a lot more fun in the process. So that's one reason, is that the percentage of chance you have of catching a certain size fish matches the rod. Now let's go on to the next reason that you need to take into consideration are the number of bites you're going to get with the size pound test line that you're going to use. So as the line size goes up to like 100 pounds, the number of fish that are going to bite your bait is going to go down. Now that doesn't mean you're not necessarily going to be able to catch something, but you're going to be able to catch more fish or get more bites at least on smaller, less visible line. And to me, there's kind of a sweet spot somewhere in between, the 6 to 10 pound, 8 pound range, definitely like 4 to 10 pound range, right in there where you're going to get a lot of bites. But once you start getting above that, you really need a good reason to do that in order to do that. So you want a rod that's going to be good at casting and handling that range of line most of the time. If you have a rod where you have to put on like a big old reel that's, you're casting out 6 pound line and light lures on this big bait casting rod, it's just not going to work. So you want a spin casting rod where you can throw these lighter, smaller lures in order to catch more fish and more species of fish. Now the great thing about this rod is I throw 2 types of line on it. I throw 6 pound mono and I throw 30 pound braid. So when you get into the situations where you need to throw that heavier line, you can still do it just fine on this rod and it casts just fine. So that's another thing you need to take into consideration. You don't want a rod and reel that can't throw small pound test because you won't get as many bites. Okay, well after the last graph you might be thinking, well yeah, you might get more bites with using light line, but it doesn't do you any good if the fish breaks it off. You still don't catch the fish, you got a bite, but you didn't get the fish in. That's true, but let's take a look at kind of the reason why I think most people get broke off, and it has more to do with the rigidity of their line and rod than it does with the line itself breaking. Now, sure, if you have 4-pound line and you hook, a giant fish, it might break you off, but usually that's going to be because it can get to some kind of cover and hide. When I watch YouTube videos and I watch people break off their fish, it's almost always because they are using a medium heavy or a heavy rod with fluorocarbon line, or sometimes braided line. And the reason I have fluorocarbon above braid here is just because it's more fragile, not necessarily because it's more rigid. But when you put these more rigid and fragile lines on a rod that basically doesn't bend or only bends in the tip, the top, like 10% or 15% of the rod that they're using, it's more likely to break. So you can, if you don't have a lot of cover that the fish is going to be hiding under, you can use, I use 6-pound mono a lot. I almost never get broken off. But the key that I want to talk about is the rod and why I chose a light power. And basically, I'm going to call this, they don't really list the action of these rods. They call it the power action on Ugly Stiks. But basically, it's a light power rod, and I'm going to call it a medium action. And what that means is basically, when you take the rod here, it's going to bend throughout the entire rod. The main bend is going to be right in the middle here. Okay, and then it still has some backbone left in it. And I'll probably put some clips up here where you can see the bigger fish will get down into that backbone. And what you want is when it hits that backbone where it's really tugging, that's where your reel and your drag are going to kick in. But you have that whole flex of the rod, and if you're using mono, you have the flex of the line too. So for me, the sweet spot for a multi-purpose rod is going to be somewhere in these ranges right here. A medium light to moderate slow to medium light to moderate slow to moderate, maybe a moderate fast. All these different rod companies have different standards on what they call light, medium light, moderate fast. They all have their different standards, so you kind of have to test them out, and that's what I've been doing here on the channel. But really the sweet spot is somewhere right in here, if you ask me. And then you also have situations where you don't want to have too much stretch. You don't want that, maybe you have to pull the fish out of cover, or you don't want them to get into cover, you don't want them to get into pylons or things that are sharp that are going to cut your line. So in that case, you want to adjust that, in my opinion, not with your rod, but with the line that you're using. So my other setup is 30-pound braid if I'm using a frog, if I know there's a lot of cover, if I'm fishing big fish, if there's a lot of current. And that will help stop those fish from getting into the places that they're going to be able to cut you off. But it doesn't really have anything to do with the length or the rigidity of the rod. You can do that just as effectively with a light rod, tightening down that drag, holding on tight, and trying to stop those fish. So, that's 99.9% of fish. There's going to be some where you probably wish you had a bigger setup, but we're going for the most species, the most numbers, the easiest to use, and that sweet spot is right here. And this rod I would consider a light power, moderate. Maybe you might go up to moderate fast, but you use that whole bend of the rod, and that's what you want, in my opinion. Okay, so those are some of the reasons why I think that this specific size and model really lend itself well to being the best multi-species all-purpose rod. A couple other factors one should consider is the durability. One of the reasons that I ended up choosing this rod was because I broke two similar rods, more expensive ones, and I was like, you know, I need something that's a little tougher. And the great thing about this is I don't ever think twice. I mean, if you need to stick it in the water and get your lure out, you know, with the tip of your rod, you can do that. It has these, it has stainless steel guides, so nothing's gonna really do too much damage to them. I mean, if you accidentally step on it or something, it's not that it's unbreakable, but it's really, really tough. And then the 6-foot size makes it really easy to get in and out of the house. You know, it's basically the same size as me. And so when I walk under the door, you know, you're bringing it under with you. You're not likely to close it in your car door. It doesn't mean you can't do it, but much less likely than with a, you know, 7-foot rod. So it's also very versatile in terms of the range of fish that it can catch, and just how you can store it, how you can pack it, how you can transport it, where you can keep it in your house. It's also pretty inexpensive. They cost $40. I'll put an Amazon link in the description if you want to check it out. Again, this is the 6-foot light powered version. So $40 is pretty cheap for a very durable rod. Now let's get on to some of the negatives, because it's not a perfect rod. It's a little weak on casting distance, in my opinion, even compared to other 6-foot rods. I'm testing out a couple other rods right now in the same 6-foot light powered division, I guess you would call it, and they both cast farther than this rod. So it's especially with light lures, I use a lot of 1/16 ounce size lures, and it's adequate, but it's not the best in terms of casting distance. Also, in terms of like aesthetics and beauty, it's not a bad looking rod, but there's nothing special about it. I mean, it looks exactly the same as every other, you know, Ugly Stik GX2 that's ever been out, with the black and the silver, and, you know, the grip is the same. It's nothing fancy with the foam handle and the plastic kind of, you know, mount. I do like that it's a top down. For me, that's a big plus. The ones that come up, that screw up from the bottom, sorry, are very uncomfortable in my opinion. But so it's not the prettiest rod. There are definitely prettier ones out there. Again, I'm testing a couple right now that look a lot better than this rod. The third one is, and I think this one might be the most important, is if you need to throw a lot of weight or jig a lot of weight, that's probably the biggest weakness of this rod. Now, typically when I'm casting out weights on like a slip sinker or fish finder rig, I'm using about an ounce, and it does that very well. And you can cast an ounce with some bait a long way. In current, I've gone up to a couple ounces plus the bait, and it does okay. Now, there's a lot of flex to the rod when you cast, but that actually helps you, and the rod's not going to break from an ounce or two. Again, the rigidity works in this rod's favor up until about, I would say, 3 ounces. So if you're fishing rivers or like tidal basins or piers, something that requires more than 3 ounces of weight, you know, routinely, this is not going to be the rod for you. You're going to need a little bit more specialized rod that can handle those 4, 5, 6 ounces or more weight. And especially if you need to cast that amount of weight a long distance, you're definitely not going to want this rod. It's not going to do the job for you if your specific fishing area requires that you do that. So it definitely is not good for every type of situation. Also, if you were to like jigging some heavier weights, and by heavy I mean more than a couple ounces, probably not the best rod to do that with. You could get by if you needed to go out and do some, you know, heavy cover jigging with this, with, you know, some heavier braid, you know, an ounce and a half, the type of big jigs that some people use for bass. You can get by with this rod. But if you're out in the ocean and you're really jigging something heavy, not going to be the rod for you. So I think I've covered some of the negatives, as well as really a long list of positives. Like I said, I have a couple rods that I'm testing out now. I'm going to compare them with the GX2 and see how they do. but it's going to be pretty hard, especially on the higher poundage fish, the larger fish. This GX2 really does a great job. I mean, I've been using it as a catfish rod, a carp rod. My daughter Vivian reeled in a 9-pound catfish, no problem with this rod, and she's only 8 years old. So, you know, if she can do that, being a little girl, basically, I mean, a grown adult should be able to reel in a 50-pound, 30-pound, 50-pound fish with this rod. It's not going to break. Now you're not going to be able to bully the fish around it up very much with it, but it's definitely going to get the job done in that area. Thanks for watching Team Cramer Fishing. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see me test out all the rest of these rods that I have coming up. I have some a couple really interesting ones, that one in particular has me pretty excited that should be coming up next. So make sure to stick around, and I'll see you later.